So there's a famous story that I tell my students when we talk about the Senate, and it may be true, it may be not. I know I heard it from my history teacher way back in high school, but it does capture the purpose of the United States Senate in a moment. It's a story where Thomas Jefferson's just returned back to the States from Paris after being abroad for all those years, and he joined George Washington for breakfast. And Jefferson, of course, is a passionate believer in simple, direct democracy, and he questions why the new Constitution needs to be bicameral, why it needs two houses, for the Congress. And, why not just one, one chamber, one voice, one democratic body. And Washington, in his very, stoic ways, he doesn't lecture, they're sitting there and he pours himself a cup of tea, and then as he doctors his tea with however he takes it, he then pours the tea into his saucer that the teacup had rested on, and of course Jefferson's taking it all in, watching, and Washington says to Jefferson, "Why do we pour our tea into the saucer?" And Jefferson replies, very matter-of-factly, to cool it. And of course, Washington nods in agreement, and he says to Jefferson, "Even so, we pour legislation into the senatorial saucer to cool it." And that, in that little anecdote, is effectively Federalist number 62. This is where the Senate exists to cool and to steady and to refine the passions that come out of the House of Representatives. I'm Matt Haskin. I'm a high school history and civics teacher, and we're making our way through all 85 of the Federalist Papers, and we're here to talk about the Senate today. So happy Thanksgiving, and let's talk about the Senate, and we'll set the stage. So now that the Constitution has explained the design of the House, and we've seen that in several of the last essays, the House has frequent elections and direct representation and very fast-moving responsiveness. Madison is going to turn to the Senate. And this is where the system becomes truly constitutional. The framers believed that a single legislative chamber, like under the Articles of Confederation, was too unstable, it was too passionate, and it was too vulnerable to faction. Think political parties, right? And so Madison's question in number 62 is kind of simple. What does the Senate do that the House alone cannot? So let's look at Madison's core argument here. So first, he argues that the Senate provides 5 crucial functions, and that is stability, state representation, experience and continuity, protection against sudden impulses, and then a long-term national perspective. So in other words, the Senate is the cooling saucer that Washington had described. And so it takes the quick, sometimes emotional energy of the House, and then it just slows it down enough to prevent harm or short-sighted laws from being created. So the Constitution requires several things, that makes it different from the House. Like senators must be at least 30 years old compared to 25 in the House. They have to have 9 years of citizenship, and they have to live in the state they represent. And Madison says this isn't elitism, it's actually practical, because the Senate handles foreign relations, treaties, high-level appointments, legislation with long-term consequences. And so those responsibilities require judgment and patience and experience. So the House is about urgency, and the Senate is more about expertise. So in 1787, when the Constitution was first written, the design was that the senators would be chosen by the state legislatures and not by direct popular vote, which would change under the 17th Amendment in 1917. But why was it originally set up this way? Well, that's because the Senate was designed to give the states themselves, as political units, a voice in the new federal government. And so this ensured, one, the working of federalism, and then holding on to that idea of state sovereignty, and then balance between national and local interests. And even after the 17th Amendment created direct election, the Senate's structural purpose remains the same. It protects the states and stabilizes the system. Now, this is about equal representation too, as the Senate was created. And the big states didn't like this. The small states insisted upon it because it was kind of what they experienced under the Articles, and Madison goes on to defend it. Every state gets 2 senators. Why? Well, because without equal representation, the small states would have never joined the Union. that's the whole crux behind the New Jersey plan being offered against the Virginia plan. And then you have the federal government would collapse into majority domination, and then regional interests would be crushed. And so equal representation isn't just compromise, it's the backbone of American federalism. Senators also serve 6-year terms, with 1/3 of the Senate up for every 2 years when members of the House are elected. Madison would say the 6-year term creates continuity, institutional memory, stability in foreign affairs, a safeguard against rash legislation, and long-term thinking. So the House reflects momentary public sentiment, where the Senate reflects the national long-term interest. We call this the continuous body, where the Congress is never all brand new. Well, when it comes to looking at the way, like the cooling saucer aspect of it, with the Senate acting as, preventing impulsive lawmaking, Madison's kind of direct or blunt here in his essay. He writes, a body of men acting by the impulse of sudden and violent passions cannot be expected to make wise and lasting laws. And so the upper house of the Senate, especially one that's designed to move more slowly, filters laws through time and reflection. The Senate doesn't block change, it tests it, and it's to make sure it's durable, just, and constitutional. Once again, the cooling saucer. So let's look at Madison's chain of reasoning here, his 5 reasons why. The first one would be that the House is too impulsive. The second chamber, which would be the Senate, adds reflection and restraint. His third point is that states must have representation as states. His fourth point is that equal representation, the 2 houses, protects the Union. And not the 2 houses, but the 2 senators per state. And then the longer terms of the senators bring stability and experience through that continuous body process. And so there's number 62 in your 5 easy steps, so you can summarize this for your homework assignment. Now, Madison's tone in this particular essay, he's more professional, methodical. It's kind of like an engineer explaining how a system can, when working well, can prevent failure. How does it fail? And he's not trying to appeal to the emotion of the readers of the essay. He's actually saying, hey, let's look at the structure. Let's appeal to the structure of the government. And so the Senate is a deliberate design for things like balance and time and stability. It's not about excitement, not about speed, not about popularity. It's just kind of like, the ballast that you don't see in the deeper parts of the ship of state, right? It's everything that keeps the ship right below the waterline and upright. Now, Madison's deeper points, the moral arguments he makes here, is that liberty can be endangered by instability just as much as by tyranny. And so a government that kind of just like jerks or lurches from impulse to impulse can't protect rights, it can't maintain trust, it can't sustain itself. And so the Senate guards small r Republican liberty. It guards that Republican liberty by guarding the Republican stability. So when we look at this in our modern times, Federalist number 62 helps explain some of the debates we still have today, why the Senate moves so slowly and why it resists sudden change and why does it represent the states equally? It's large population versus small population states. Why its procedures can frustrate the House, why its elections don't align with the House's political cycles. And every argument about the Senate's role traces back to Madison's conviction that speed kills republics and deliberation saves them. So our takeaways today are the Senate stabilizes the legislative process, equal representation protects smaller states and preserves the Union, and experience and longer terms promote wise, lasting laws. Federalist 62 explains the Senate not as an aristocratic chamber, but as a constitutional safeguard. The House represents the people, the Senate protects the long-term health of the Republic. The House carries the heat of passion, public passion, and the Senate cools it into lasting legacy. Just like Washington's tea, poured into the saucer so the nation doesn't burn its tongue. Hang around and catch me tomorrow when I'll throw out number 63, and this is why we'll talk about 2 chambers again. It's Madison back. Thanks for hanging around for this really long one today.